Let's talk about quantitative public health articles. Now, these are a little different than qualitative articles. In a qualitative article, we'll have other pieces talking about focus groups maybe or other kinds of methods. You can tell something is a quantitative article when you look in the abstract, and here we're going to use our example of the Torres and Waldinger article that I posted in the class. And you look in the abstract and you see here that they have thousands of people that they interviewed for this particular study. Now it says they're using the 2007 Pew Hispanic Center Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Hispanic Healthcare Survey. Now the reason I chose this article is because this is actually a data set that we don't cover in the class. And if you look in the syllabus, you'll see all the data sets that we do. So I hope this gives you some idea that there are still even more data sets out there than the ones that we're going to cover in the class. But what this means is that the researchers did not themselves field a study. This is secondary data analysis. And so it's going to be a case control study where they look at retrospective data and examine this survey data. So the abstract will give you, good clues about what's happening in the article and will at least let you know, very basic information about their findings. But I do not recommend when you're really looking at an article only reading the abstract. Because if you only read the abstract, you're going to miss some very, very important issues that will come up in the actual text. So for this lecture, I'm going to use this article throughout and go through and point out all of the different pieces of the text to you. In order, first we have this section here where they're introducing the issue to the reader. And then really what they're doing is they're talking about the wider concepts of immigration, and notice they say here cross-mobility rights. So they spend some time in this article just explaining what it is they're going to be talking about. By the way, one thing I forgot to mention, let's go back up to the top here, and you'll see this article is from a journal called the Journal of Health and Social Behavior from the American Sociological Association. So it is not something that's actually from a public health journal, but it's still a public health issue. Our discipline crosses many different social sciences, and so you want to be open to finding journal articles in other sources from other peer-reviewed journals that might not necessarily just be public health focused. Okay, so the background here, this background section defines these key terms about migration control, civic stratification. So the reason why they define this article in such depth, in part, is because it is a sociological article, and so they're very interested in making sure that they're really grounded in the literature. And this literature section is longer than you might see in some other articles, but it gives you a very good idea of what other people have done. So they're thinking about their study not as an independent, completely different, completely new idea, but as something that builds on what others have done. And that's really what social science is all about. Usually if you can't find any other studies that match what you're doing in any terms, then you might just be a little bit too out there. So this picture here, as part of the background section, is called the conceptual framework. You notice they say that right here, conceptual framework. So what it does is it provides a figure that allows you to see where their research fits in to sociological theory. If you don't do this step beforehand and you just dive into data sets, then what you're doing is called data fishing. And that's a problem because in statistics, you will likely just by probability be able to find some significant relationships if you just start running data analysis after data analysis, especially if you have a sample size of about 2,700 people. Something is going to come up with a p-value of less than 0.05. Now the problem is that even if it's statistically significant, it might not be substantively significant. So these kinds of conceptual frameworks really frame the research so that before you go and look for the data, you actually know what it is that you're looking for and you have an idea of what these relationships look like based on the previous literature. And that's actually why I put this lecture in the front of the class, thinking about before we get into all these data sets, we need to recognize the importance of conceptual frameworks, even if we don't have our own, and know that every article you're going to read, every time you go into a data set, you want to have already done the work of thinking about what is the background, what is the significance of what it is that we're about to look for. And then the data sets are really just tools to find out the information that you already know that you're going into, think about these frameworks. Now, that doesn't mean you know the answer to your question, right? You have a research question, you have a hypothesis, a way that you think it might go. And in science, we have to be open to that we may get significant results or we may not get significant results. And both of those findings are important. So let's move on here in the public health the background section. And of course, this would be something that you're going to be reading before you do your discussion section post. And you can see here again, they really go into depth on all of the different terms. So finally, we get down here to where it stops and it says hypotheses. So everything before this, for this article, is your background and introduction section. And it just sets up the framework that they're going to be thinking about for their research.